This book is dedicated to Stephen Lawrence, who, in the words of his mother to the Stephen Lawrence Inquiry, had he been given the chance to survive, maybe he would have been the one to bridge the gap between black and white, because he didn't distinguish between black or white. He saw people as people.
From Chapter 3, Frustration when the 5 prime suspects were questioned by the inquiry. Monday 29th of June 1998 was the 50th day of the inquiry's public hearings. This was the day for which Doreen and Neville Lawrence, many Black Britons and British anti-racists had been waiting. The 5 prime suspects of the murder of Stephen Lawrence, notorious after having their photos splashed across the front page of the Daily Mail under the headline "Murderers" 5 years previously, were now due to face the inquiry.
There was nothing in the terms of reference for the inquiry, nor was there any guidance about the degrees of openness of the inquiry to the scrutiny of the public or the media. However, during preliminary discussions, the judge and his 3 advisers agreed that every effort had to be made to ensure that the public would find it easy to be present during the proceedings and feel welcomed. This was a major part of the responsibility of the secretary to the inquiry, who was a Home Office middle-grade civil servant in the policing section. His services had been given to the inquiry as a donation in kind. The inquiry anticipated that hundreds more people than usual would arrive at the inquiry on these 2 days to witness Mike Mansfield QC in action, questioning the 5 men on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence. The routine presence of 7 legal teams had resulted in some of the space originally planned for the public being allocated to the lawyers.
We would need more than the 150 chairs usually supplied in the chamber. Even with extra chairs and a limited number of people standing round the walls, it was clear that an overflow room would be needed. In the weeks before, plans had been proceeding well for an overflow room for 300 more visitors, connected to the chamber by video and sound links. At the very last moment, the secretary, Stephen Wells, was informed by police that the planned overflow room breached health and safety regulations and could not be used. This was an alarming situation, and the secretary felt obliged to cancel the overflow room.
I suggested to him that we might have been misled by the police officers, using the health and safety issues to keep out the anticipated large numbers of black people who were about to descend on the inquiry. He disagreed and said this would have to go higher.
3 days later, on Monday 29th of June, people crowded into the streets around the Elephant and Castle to get into Hannibal House, where the inquiry was based. They came from all backgrounds. From South East London, where Stephen Lawrence had been murdered, from the rest of London, from Birmingham, from Manchester, from all over Britain. This was the chance for communities and the public far and wide to see for themselves what these men looked like and what sort of character showed on their faces.
Yet the inquiry was seen not to have arranged adequate accommodation for all those people who had come to be present when the sparks began to fly.
The suspects were escorted in turn to the witness seat in front of the judge and the panel of the inquiry. They would be questioned principally by the formidable Mike Mansfield QC, representing the Lawrence family, while Ed Lawson, QC for the inquiry, also tried, within the limits of allowable questions, to get helpful answers from them, as did Ian MacDonald, QC for Dwayne Brooks. On their left, the suspects would see 10 teams of barristers, swollen to 12 by their own lawyers. The witness chair was face-on to Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence, only 20 feet away.
The first hour was an anticlimax. The judge had to negotiate with the barristers acting for the 5 to finalise what questions the witnesses could and could not be asked. Their lawyers had already taken the inquiry to the High Court to have this clarified. The ruling confirmed that this was not a court of law, but an inquiry into policing. Therefore, questions about their involvement in a murder were forbidden, as were questions about almost any topic of significance. Perhaps the best example of the limits placed on Mr. Mansfield can be found in his questioning of Luke Knight, the last of the 5 to be questioned. It demonstrates the huge gap between what we wanted to be asked and what was able to be asked in law. The barrister representing Luke Knight is Mr. Williams.
Michelle Casserly, do you know her?
She's an ex-girlfriend of mine.
Any reason why she would have it in for you particularly?
I was a bit of a bastard to her.
You were. You see, I want to ask you whether you can help. You, amongst others, were named in her diary as having...
Sir, again I rise. I try not to rise too often, but Mr Mansfield, I fear, is trespassing again within the territory that the High Court ruled only 2 weeks ago. Is this a policing question?
It is in the sense that Michelle Casserly is part of the Casserly family whose diary was taken.
Well, it was made quite clear in the High Court by his lordship that issues that are only incidental to issues you are concerned
Yes,
with...
I appreciate that. The question is this. Did you say anything to any of your friends in the week or two that followed, in particular the days that followed the murder, that might suggest you knew who was involved?
Knew who was involved in what?
Again, I'm afraid not, Mr Mansfield. The exploration of this has been gone into with the police officers. I do not think you should trespass into this.